Hello Internet, welcome back to Trumps at Twilight, the channel where I, Vincent, talk to you, the ever-expanding universe, about books, movies, music I enjoy, find interesting, or a combination of the two. Today I'm going to be talking about a book about movies that is A Bollywood State of Mind by Sunny Singh. Sunny Singh grew up in India. Her father was involved in the military and in diplomacy. I'm not sure exactly what his job was. I'm not sure if she ever really says it. He seems to have been a pretty big deal. So he was posted around the world in various continents and countries throughout her childhood. So though she's from India, she's lived a very international life. And as an adult, she's also traveled a lot, studied abroad, lived in different places. And she now lives in the UK where she works at a university. She's also a novelist. I've recently become interested in Indian cinema, and most of what I know about it is, well, the little that I know about it is about Hindi cinema. And Sunny Singh writes primarily also about Hindi cinema in this book. That's the cinema that she grew up with, and it's the cinema that is often referred to as Bollywood, though she discusses in the book how this is not a term that is terribly popular with everybody. The book is partly a memoir and it's partly a theory of Hindi cinema. The memoir part of the book is spread out throughout the chapters in a roughly chronological order, telling a story of Sunny Singh, who grew up with Hindi cinema, and it sparked her interest in storytelling, her fascination for the techniques of narrative, the techniques of symbolism. She talks about how these movies were a communal experience within her family, and how cinema in India also had a particular oral tradition initially, because not everybody would have seen a film, but you would feel that you'd seen a film because people in your family would describe the film to you in great detail. So you could see a movie without actually seeing a movie if your auntie or your older sister had seen the film. As she gets older and she moves to different countries, she finds that Hindi cinema can either be a bridge between different peoples or it can be a kind of divider. In the Western world, she discovers that nobody really knows her movies, nobody really respects them. There are a few Indian filmmakers respected in the Western world, but those are mostly people working in a more realist tradition that's similar to European film. But for example, in the Soviet Union, knowing the songs of Hindi cinema is a kind of secret code or a point of solidarity between Soviet officers and the Indian military, the Indian diplomats. She describes dancing in a nightclub in Latin America because everywhere she goes, she always finds the local dance trends, the local dance environments. She's on the dance floor one night and she hears a song from a Hindi movie worked into the rhythms and the beat of one of the dance tracks that's playing, and she suddenly freezes on the dance floor and looks around her, realizes that nobody else has clocked it, and it's a very strange and powerful experience for her. Later in life, she's in Egypt, and everywhere she goes, people ask her if she's Indian. And when she says that she is, they ask her about her favorite movies. They tell her what their favorite movies are. They ask her about the great stars of Hindi cinema. She goes into the pyramid, and one of the guards there asks her if she can tell Shah Rukh Khan to come to Egypt so that he can meet him. As a novelist, Sunny Singh is very good at these memoir parts of the book. She describes very vividly going to the cinema with her family and how the cinema in India is a communal experience, for example, where people are sharing food and singing the songs and heckling the actors and crying and laughing, and how she finds Western cinema to be a very isolating experience. But these autobiographical sections are actually the minority within the text. The text is mostly her attempt to describe and theorize Hindi cinema and how it works. I can't go into all the detail because it's very rigorous and it's super interesting, but there are some interesting points I'd like to share. So, one of the things, for example, is the narrative structure, the difference between Indian cinema, perhaps particularly Hindi movies, but she says most Indian film, compared to European and American cinema, which I'll just probably call Western cinema. She talks about how the narrative structure is noticeably different. And this is something I noticed as soon as I started watching Indian cinema, but I didn't really have a context for it. And what's interesting is that for Western viewers, Indian movies can seem very sprawling and a little confusing. She says that when she first watched Hollywood films, she couldn't understand them because the narrative made no sense to her. The way that it was set up, just it seemed very fragmented. And an example of this is that any film that has a revenge plot, which is a very popular plot in American cinema also, but in an Indian movie, if you have a revenge plot, there has to be an inciting incident that grounds the hero's desire for revenge in the community. Something has to happen that makes him or her motivated to act on behalf of the community. And this will often be worked into the film as a flashback, so you won't necessarily know what this is, or it'll occur sort of after an hour, and then the next part of the film will be following this hero's arc, or it might even be a past life. And this is another thing, is that the movies of Bollywood follow often a kind of mythical structure. But I find this thing about needing to ground the protagonist's quest or journey or desires in their relationships to the people around them really interesting. This is why there will also usually be subsidiary characters, supporting cast in Indian movies that will give you a sense of where the person lives and who they live with. She writes that when Indian writers and directors adapt American movies for an Indian audience, they usually introduce a whole load of extra characters so that they can create this sense of community. And they also often place emphasis more on moral aspects of the story than is in the original version. She shares a story that illustrates this. She has a nephew who's watching one of the Terminator movies and he's completely confused. And he says to her, I don't understand this film. Why does he want to save the world? He loves no one and no one loves him. Sunny Singh makes an argument that the logic of American and European cinema is often a cognitive logic where we are always asking, okay, what comes next? How will this one thing lead to the next thing? The narrative is causal, whilst the narrative structure of Hindi cinema is primarily emotional. And she links this back to a foundational text of Sanskrit theatre, which describes the concept of the rasas. And a rasa is like the essence of a work, it's the emotional core of a work. You have love, humour, sorrow, wrath, heroism, terror, disgust, and wonder. And any movie or theatrical work can have a primary rasa that is one of these. So many Hindi movies are love stories, so their primary rasa is Shringar or love. There's a deity connected to this also, which is Vishnu. But a comedy will have Hasya, which is humor, and many stories also are stories of heroism. So this rasa is Veera, and she says that the dominant rasa in a work succeeds by its combination with subservient rasa. So any of these rasas can be combined and should be combined. So the real trick of a perfect piece of cinema is to have as many rasas as possible working together to support the dominant rasa. And this is compared to making a meal and combining spices in such a way that the dominant taste will be enhanced instead of overwhelmed, which is interesting because the classic Bollywood movie is often called a masala movie. She explains how the dominant rasa will often be established early in the film, but the film will have almost a spiral where it will move through the other rasas to come back to the dominant rasa, and it will touch in on it during the film to always remind you, so that if the dominant rasa is a tragic love story, then the move through humor will be offset by something bittersweet. And this explains what seems very incongruous to many Western viewers, which is that in a tragic film about terrible events, an apparently jovial song will appear, a dance number, because the whole idea is that the audience can give themselves to this joy in the knowledge that it will be followed by pain. And this is something that actually has confused me sometimes when I've been watching Hindi movies, is that a very fun, jovial song will suddenly end in a horrifying fashion, or in a tragic fashion, or with violence. And Sunny Singh says that the Indian viewer intuitively knows that this will happen because they know what the dominant rasa of the film is. Even if they haven't read this foundational text, they know it from having consumed this cinema, which is based on this form of theatre, and they will expect to return to the emotional core of the work, and that feeling will have been enhanced by the feeling that they just went through. She describes as well how there are forms of direct address in Indian movies, forms of performance that break the what would be suspension of disbelief. Especially in the musical numbers, people will change location, they will change costume, but she describes how also in the course of a film, somebody's haircut doesn't need to have what we would call continuity in Hollywood movies, because the haircut might be symbolic. This is the same for the sound effects, which I mentioned when I watched the film Da in the video that I was talking about it, where there were footsteps had echo on them. They made no attempt to disguise the fact that the voices were dubbed. Violence has sound effects that are not realistic, and she says that in some ways these techniques are used to enhance the emotion at the same time as they remind you of the artifice, so that you're not completely overwhelmed or drawn into the emotional whirlpool of the movie, so that you can enjoy it as a spectator at the same time as you can allow yourself to experience the emotion of the piece. And she says that in some ways it can be compared to Brechtian alienation techniques, except that in Indian theatre and Sanskrit theatre that came before it, there was never a fourth wall, so there is no fourth wall to break. They don't have that convention. So this is a really fascinating book. It's really interesting, and I've only been able to sum up some small aspects of it, and also without all of Singh's extremely detailed and rich knowledge both of this theory and of the movies that she's talking about. If there are any downsides to this book, it does have a style which suggests that perhaps the different chapters may have been independent essays at some point, because sometimes she repeats points of theory almost verbatim throughout the book, especially like this example of the cooking a meal with the combination of rasas comes back several times, and she doesn't sort of refer to the fact she's already explained this. I think maybe this is because, she's making separate arguments like about editing, about mise en scène, and she needs you to have the relevant context each time, but it can feel a little repetitive sometimes. There are also many, many close readings, extremely close readings of Indian films. I liked these. I thought it was really interesting, but I noticed that I liked it even better on the few occasions when I had seen the film. So when she's doing close readings of Sholay, for example, which I saw recently, I enjoy that more than when she's talking about some of the other movies from the 70s that I don't know. And I can only imagine this might be the same for you as a reader if you picked up the book. If you're not very well versed in the cinema, you have to accept the fact she's going to be talking about a whole lot of films you've never seen. The book also traces Indian cinema from pre-independence through partition and up to the present day. And towards the end, in the final pages, she talks about the horrifying rise of Hindu nationalism and how Hindu nationalism sees Bollywood, which has generally been more inclusive, as a kind of threat, and has orchestrated attacks on Bollywood as an industry, on performers, on directors. But she closes the book talking about her and her mother, now two grey-haired ladies, going to the cinema in India, being surrounded by young people who are having just as much a party in this screening as they were having when she was a kid, and this sense of cinema as an art form, as something unifying. So that's it for now. That's my take on A Bollywood State of Mind. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if you did, thank you for listening. Please click like on the video, it helps other people to see it, and I'll see you again soon.